Imagine being 9 years old, your father has just been poisoned by enemies, and now the tribe your family depended on for survival has made a decision about you and your brother and your mother and sisters. They are living without you, without any of you. They take the horses, they take the food, they take every animal, and they ride away across the steppe, the vast, empty, freezing grasslands of Mongolia, leaving a widow and her young children with nothing. No shelter beyond their single tent, no food beyond what they can find themselves, no protection in a land where rival tribes, wild animals, and brutal winters kill people every season. Most children abandoned in this situation would be dead within months. This boy was not most children. His name was Temujin, and he would grow up to become the ruler of the largest land empire in all of human history. An empire so large that it covered nearly a quarter of the land on earth. The world would call him Genghis Khan. This is how it happened. To understand Genghis Khan, you first need to understand the world he was born into, because it was one of the most brutal environments a human being could survive in. Mongolia in the 1100s was a land of nomadic tribes. People moved constantly across the vast grasslands, following their herds of horses, sheep, and cattle. There were no cities, no kings, no single ruler, just dozens and dozens of competing tribes, each one fighting the others for grazing land, horses, and survival. Alliances were made and broken constantly. Raids on other tribes were normal. Kidnapping women and children from rival tribes was common. Betrayal was simply part of life. There was no concept of Mongolia as a united country. It was a fractured, violent patchwork of clans who spoke the same basic language but treated each other as enemies more often than friends. Into this world, around 1162, a boy named Temujin was born to a tribal chief named Yasuge and his wife Holin. His father was a respected but not especially powerful leader, important enough with his own tribe, but not famous or feared beyond it. From his earliest years, Temujin was taught the skill of the steppe, riding horses, shooting arrows from horseback, surviving cold, tracking animals. These were not optional skills in this world. They were simply what you needed to know to stay alive. He had a childhood for a few years, then his father made a decision that changed everything. When Temujin was around 9 years old, his father Yasuge arranged a marriage for him. As was the custom, young Temujin was brought to the camp of a neighboring tribe, the Ongiret people, and introduced to a girl named Bot, who was approximately the same age. They liked each other. The arrangement was made. Yasuge left his son at the Ongiret camp to live and get to know his future bride's family, another custom of the time. Then he began the long ride home alone. On his way home, he stopped at the camp of another tribe, the Tatars. The Tatars were enemies of his people, but the rules of Mongolian steppe hospitality required that you offer food and drink to any traveler who stopped at your camp. Yasuge accepted their hospitality. He should not have. The Tatars recognized him and they poisoned his food. By the time Yasuge reached home, he was very sick. He sent a messenger to bring Temujin back quickly. Temujin rushed home, but he arrived too late. His father died shortly after. And now the tribe made its decision. Without a strong chief, they saw no reason to stay loyal to a widow and her young children. One by one, the families of the tribe packed up and left, taking everything leaving Holland and her children, Temujin, his brothers Khasar, Hatchuin, and Temujin, and his sister Tamulan, and two stepsons with almost nothing. Holland refused to collapse. She dug up roots from the river bank. She picked berries. She caught fish with her bare hands. She kept her children alive through sheer force of will in that first terrible year. Temujin watched all of this. He was 9 years old and he was learning a lesson he would never forget. In this world, power was everything. Without power, even a chief's family could be thrown away like a rubbish. He decided in those hungry years on the steppe that he would never be powerless again. The years that followed Yasuge's death were dangerous and hard. Temujin and his brothers were not just poor, they were vulnerable targets in a world where raiding and kidnapping were normal. A family without warriors to protect them was an easy victim. When Temujin was around 13, a group of warriors from a rival tribe arrived and arrested him. He was taken as a prisoner and forced to wear a kang, a heavy wooden collar and board locked around his neck, used to restrain prisoners and make escape almost impossible. He was held in this way, humiliated and physically restricted as a slave of the rival tribe. Most people in this situation would have accepted it as their fate. Temujin did not. He waited, he watched, he studied the patterns of the gods. He looked for his moment. One night, during a celebration, when the gods were distracted and drinking, Temujin made his move. He used his kang itself as a weapon, swinging it to knock down the one man who tried to stop him, and ran into the darkness. He hid in a river, submerged up to his neck in freezing water, only his face above the surface. For hours, while searchers passed by with torches looking for him, when they finally gave up and left, he crawled out, half frozen, and escaped into the steppe. A man from a nearby family helped him, hid him, and eventually helped him get safely away. Temujin never forgot the names of people who helped him, and he never forgot the names of people who betrayed him. Both categories of memory would matter enormously in the years ahead. As Temujin grew into a young man, he returned to the Ongirat tribe and married Bort, the girl his father had arranged for him years before. It was a genuine marriage, not just a political one. Temujin and Bort remained devoted to each other throughout their lives, even as Temujin later took other wives, as was the custom of Mongolian leaders. But the marriage was tested almost immediately. A rival tribe called the Merkits, who had an old grievance against Temujin's family from years before, launched a raid on Temujin's camp in the early morning. They came fast, before anyone could properly react. Temujin escaped on horseback, but Bort was captured. She was taken as slave wife by a Merkit leader. She was gone for approximately 8 months. For Temujin, this was not simply a personal loss, though it clearly was that. In the culture of Mongolian steppe, a leader who could not protect his own wife had no credibility. If he wanted to be taken seriously, he had to get her back. To do that, he needed allies, and this is where Temujin's extraordinary political intelligence first showed itself. He reached out to two powerful figures, a childhood blood brother named Jamukha and a powerful tribal leader named Togrul, who owed a debt of loyalty to Temujin's late father. Together, they assembled a force of warriors and launched a surprise attack on the Merkit camp. The attack was swift and overwhelming. Bort was rescued, the Merkits were scattered, and Temujin returned home with his wife, his two new allies, and something enormously valuable that money could never buy: a reputation. People across the steppe heard the story. A young man with almost nothing had called in favors, built alliances from scratch, and struck back with devastating effectiveness against a tribe that thought itself untouchable. They started paying attention to Temujin. Over the next 20 years, Temujin did something that no one had ever managed to do on the Mongolian steppe. He united the tribes, not by simply asking nicely, not purely by force either. He did it through a combination of brilliant military tactics, generous rewards for loyalty, absolute ruthlessness toward enemies, and a radical new idea for how a society should work. In the old tribal system, your position depended entirely on which family you were born into. Sons of chiefs became chiefs, sons of slaves stayed slaves. Temujin threw this system away. In his growing confederation of followers, your rank depended on your ability and your loyalty to him, not your family name. A talented man from a low family could rise to command thousands. A useless man from a noble family received nothing special. This was revolutionary, and it attracted enormous numbers of talented, ambitious people who had been trapped at the bottom of the old system. He also introduced strict rules. Looting during battle was forbidden until Temujin said it was allowed. This kept his armies disciplined and under control in ways that other Mongolian forces simply were not. Soldiers who followed orders were rewarded generously. Soldiers who disobeyed were punished without exception. One by one, the tribes of the steppe folded into his orbit. Some joined willingly, seeing which way the wind was blowing. Others were defeated in battle and absorbed. Those who surrendered were treated fairly and incorporated into his growing force. Those who fought to the end and then tried to betray him afterward faced total destruction. Temujin's message to the steppe was simple: join me and you will be rewarded. Betray me and nothing will remain. In 1206, at a great gathering of all the Mongolian tribes called a Kurultai, Temujin was declared the supreme ruler of all the Mongols. He was given a new title, Genghis Khan. It means roughly universal ruler. He was approximately 44 years old. He had started with nothing. He now commanded the most powerful military force the steppe had ever produced, and he had just begun. The Mongol army under Genghis Khan was unlike anything the world had encountered before. Speed was their greatest weapon. Mongol warriors could ride for days with minimal rest, covering distances that enemy armies considered impossible. They carried dried meat and blood from their horses as food, lightweight and requiring no cooking. They could travel up to 100 kilometers in a single day when needed. By the time an enemy had heard the Mongols were coming, the Mongols were often already there. Their tactics in battle were sophisticated and flexible. They used feint retreats, pretending to run away in panic, then turning and destroying the enemy forces that chased them. They used psychological warfare, sending messages ahead of their arrival, describing what happened to cities that resisted. Many cities surrendered without a single arrow being fired, simply from fear. They were also extremely adaptive when they encountered walled cities, something that steppe warriors had no experience with. They learned quickly. They recruited engineers from the cities they captured and built sophisticated siege weapons, catapults, battering rams, towers on wheels. Within years, the Mongols, who had never seen a walled city before, were defeating fortified cities across Asia with efficient, methodical skill. Genghis Khan also had an intelligence network that was remarkable for the era. Before any major campaign, his agents, traders, travelers, spies moved through the target region gathering information about routes, defenses, internal politics, and potential allies. He rarely went into a campaign blind. He was not just a warrior, he was a strategist, and the combination was almost impossible to stop. Once declared Genghis Khan, he turned his unified army outward. First came northern China, the Jin dynasty, which controlled a large part of northern China, had long looked down on the Mongols as primitive barbarians from the steppe. They would pay enormously for that mistake. Genghis Khan launched campaign after campaign into northern China, breaking through the famous defenses and eventually capturing enormous amounts of wealth, technology, and crucially skilled administrators and engineers who joined his growing empire. Then came Central Asia, the Khwarezmian Empire, a powerful and wealthy Islamic state covering what is today Iran, Afghanistan, and part of Central Asia, made a catastrophic mistake. Their ruler killed Genghis Khan's trade ambassadors. This was not just an insult to Genghis Khan, it was a declaration of war. What followed was one of the most devastating military campaigns in history. City after magnificent city, Samarkand, Bukhara, Urgench, was besieged, captured, and in many cases largely destroyed. The Khwarezmian Empire, which had seemed so powerful, was effectively erased within a few years. The destruction in Central Asia was so severe that historians still debate how long it took the region to recover. Some cities never fully recovered at all. By the time of his death, the Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific coast of China all the way to the Caspian Sea. His sons and grandsons would extend it further still, all the way to Eastern Europe, to the borders of Germany and Poland, to the Middle East, and deep into Southeast Asia. At its peak, the Mongol Empire was the largest contiguous land empire in all of human history. No empire before or since has ever controlled more connected land. The story of Genghis Khan is often told as a story of pure destruction, and there was real, terrible destruction. The lives lost in his campaigns, particularly in Central Asia and China, numbered in the millions. Whole populations were displaced or killed. Cities that had stood for centuries were reduced to rubble. This part of his legacy is real and should not be minimized. But there is another side of Genghis Khan that is less often told. Under the Mongol Empire, an era of relative peace and stability spread across a vast portion of the known world. Historians call this the Pax Mongolica, the Mongolian peace. For roughly a century, the trade routes connecting China, Central Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, the famous Silk Road, were safer and more active than they had been in generations. Genghis Khan had a strict rule. Merchants and travelers crossing Mongol territory were to be protected. Robbing a merchant was punishable by death. This meant that for the first time in centuries, goods, ideas, art, science, and disease, for better and worse, could move freely across an enormous stretch of the world. Many historians argue that the connections created during the Mongol Empire period accelerated the transmission of technology and knowledge between East and West significantly, eventually contributing to developments in Europe that led to Renaissance. Genghis Khan himself was also surprisingly open-minded about religion. He personally followed traditional Mongolian shamanistic beliefs, but he exempted Christian priests, Buddhist monks, Muslim imams, and other religious leaders from taxation and military service. He did not force conquered peoples to give up their faith. He was a complex man, violent and merciful, destructive and constructive, feared, and by those loyal to him, genuinely loved. In 1227, Genghis Khan died. He was approximately 65 years old. The cause of his death is one of the history's great mysteries. He was on a military campaign against the Western Xia kingdom in northwestern China when he died. The exact circumstances were deliberately kept secret by his followers. Different historical sources give different explanations. Some say he fell from his horse during a hunt and never recovered from his injuries. Some say he died of illness, possibly a fever or a plague-like disease. One account, written centuries later, claims he was fatally wounded by a captive Tangut princess. Most modern historians consider this last explanation unlikely, but it has never been definitely ruled out. Whatever the cause, Genghis Khan knew he was dying. He had time to arrange the succession and give his final instructions to his sons. His instructions on burial were precise. He wanted no momentum, no grand tomb, no markers. He did not want his grave to become a place of pilgrimage or a target for enemies. His body was carried home to Mongolia by a funeral procession. Accounts say that anyone who encountered the procession on the road was killed to keep the route secret. A river was reportedly diverted over his burial site to hide it completely. To this day, the grave of Genghis Khan has never been found. The man who conquered the known world lies somewhere in the Mongolian steppe, unmarked, undiscovered, and unreachable. Today, in Mongolia, Genghis Khan is not a monster, he is a hero. His face is on their currency, a massive silver statue of him on horseback, one of the largest equestrian statues on earth, stands on the Mongolian steppe. Airports, streets, and products carry his name. He is the father of their nation. In other parts of the world, Central Asia, China, Eastern Europe, memory of him is far darker, tied to the destruction and loss his campaigns caused. Both reactions make sense, both reflect real history. What is undeniable is this: a boy who was abandoned on an empty steppe at 9 years old, with no food, no allies, and no future, became the man who built the largest land empire in human history. He did it through intelligence, through ruthlessness, through loyalty, and through a complete refusal to accept the limits that his birth had placed on him. Whatever you think of the methods, the story of Temujin, the boy left to die, is one of the most extraordinary human journeys ever recorded, and the world has never seen anything quite like him since. If Genghis Khan's story amazed you, hit subscribe right now, because every single day past portraits brings you true stories from history just like this one. Stories of real people who changed the world forever. Drop a comment below and tell me, do you think Genghis Khan as a hero or a villain or something more complicated than either? I want to read your answer and let me know which historical story you want past portraits to cover next. I will see you tomorrow.